Welcome to the New Hampshire Secrets, Legends, and Lore podcast, where twice a month we explore the world of New Hampshire that lies outside of the hard news. I'm your host, Wayne King, and I invite you to join us for an adventure that will take us on a journey together to explore those things that are unlikely to make the pages of your newspaper, the waves of your radio station, or the bits and bytes of your favorite news website. Yet for many of us, these stories will reveal what makes life here in the Granite State truly worth living. Together we'll uncover some secrets, speculate on a few rumors and legends, and we'll meet the people and a critter or two, both living and long departed, who weave together the colorful tapestry of New Hampshire's past, as well as some who are helping to build our future. We'll explore places known and unknown that you will want to add to your bucket list. We'll laugh together, gasp together, and maybe even shed a tear or two. Man, it's like they seem to be trying to brick by brick dismantle the commitment to public education in New Hampshire these days.
That's the Free Staters' goal. There's no question about that.
Well, you seem to sort of lay it all at the doorstep of the. Maybe I should let's formalize this a little bit. David Luneau is going to be joining us in a minute, but I'm speaking with my old friend Mel Myler, who has been an education guru from my earliest days in the legislature. So it's nice to be able to talk with you, Mel. You just made a statement about the Free Staters, and I was about to ask you why it is that you lay so many of the woes within the public education system in New Hampshire today at the doorstep of the Free Staters.
Well, they basically have taken over the Republican Party, and even now with as close as the votes that we have, with 198 to 201 in the House, it makes those 60 or so Free Staters, they just are powerful in driving the agenda of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party that you and I knew, back in the mid 80s and early 90s, that party is no longer there. And I feel sorry for those who are moderate Republicans, but there is no space in the party for them at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I look back at the Senate of certainly the Senate of '92 when Ralph Huff was the Senate president, and we worked to make that so. And then before that, Ed DuPont, who ran for governor and
Oh, yeah.
refused to take the pledge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You
That's
know,
right.
may he
You know,
rest in
you look at the
peace.
moderate Republicans that were in last session. People like Jim Allard and Duchesne up in the Lakes area. They were moderates and they were primaried out, and so there are a few moderates left in the party. And, you know, one of the things that I have said all along, that as a Democrat, I have never been asked, never in 11 years, been asked to vote a certain way. I mean, even when Governor Hassan was pushing gambling, I was against that. I never got a call that said, Mel, you need to support the governor's program on this. We've always have had the mantra that vote your conscience and vote the way you think your constituents would vote. That's not the
Yeah.
way it is in the Republican Party today. If you don't toe the line of their agenda, you will be primaried out, and that's what's happened to the most of the moderates that we've worked with over the last 11 years that I've been in the House. Anyway, there's David.
Well,
Hey, Mel. Hey, Wayne.
hey, David Lunau, nice to have you with us. And I'm glad that you could get away to join us. We were just talking about the Free Staters, and do you have any any observations about their role in what's happening with public education?
So, you know, I think we've certainly been warned about this over the last couple of decades, but you know what we're seeing now, certainly with the school voucher program, is really this money grab. It really has nothing to do with ed choice or school or students having options to leave their public school, but it's a private school tuition payment program, and I think the Free Staters are looking at it as free money.
Do you do you, do you know, has there been any effort made to try and uh, sort of find some common ground on these issues, or are they just completely out there by themselves and not willing to compromise in any way?
Well,
Well, I think
one of the things that we've done, David and I both serve on the House Education Committee. I'm the ranking Dem, and David's the deputy ranking. And one of the things we tried to do at the beginning of this session, we said, okay, there's a program here. We didn't have any bill in to repeal it. What we did try to do is to provide a series of bills that would provide some guide rails that could manage this system, which is not manageable right now. They basically are taking taxpayer dollars and providing tuition or vouchers for kids to go to religious schools, and that's where most of them are going right now. There are 3,200 students involved in the what is called the Education Freedom Account program, and only 100 of them chose to leave the public schools to go to private religious schools. Most of them had already been in those schools and are now taking advantage of taxpayer money to pay for those tuitions. So, you know, that's where that voucher program is right now. And the ground we can talk about, Wayne, we can talk about some of the guardrails that we've proposed and are now, frankly, are going to be considered by the House in the next couple of weeks as we exec these bills out of our Education Committee. David,
Yeah,
you want
I'd like to
comment?
hear. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. So yeah, as Mel pointed out, there's a number of bills that we have filed that really, I think, put some reasonable guardrails on the school voucher program. One of them that we've actually, a couple of them that we have successfully passed on the House floor. One of them would actually put the program under the administration of the New Hampshire Department of Education. And that's important because currently it's being administered by a private contractor who keeps 10% of the taxpayer funds that are appropriated to the program. The governor's proposing another $60 million in the current state in the coming state budget to go towards school vouchers, and the contractor would get to keep $6 million of that. And from what we can tell from the contractor's website, they employ 7 people, and they're part of a national organization, but we think it can be done a lot more efficiently in the with the Department of Education that already administers programs for 165,000 kids across the state. So that's an important one.
And by David on that, but by bringing it into the Department of Education, it provides a direct oversight on the part of the legislature to the department's program, and the department right now is administering billions of federal dollars to school districts. So it's not that they don't have the infrastructure or the wherewithal to do it, but by moving it within the Department of Education rather than the private entity that's called the Children's Scholarship Fund, it provides direct legislative oversight. Right now, there is little oversight to this program that's spending millions of taxpayer dollars out there.
Right. So there's as I understand it, even the budget figure doesn't necessarily reflect the number of people that are going to apply for and receive the funds. Is that correct?
Well, you're absolutely right, Wayne, and the way the law is structured is it's designed to be a blank check. So and we saw how that went south real fast on the current state budget, because the Department of Ed budgeted $140,000 for the first year of the program, and thinking that a couple hundred kids from public schools would apply. Well, it turns out they got that part right, but they didn't understand that thousands of private school kids students who are already in private schools are homeschooled wanted to get the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 taxpayer check, and so the budget exploded from $140,000 to closer to $9 million.
And this money is coming directly out of the Education Trust Fund, and that trust fund is devoted to state aid to public schools and to charter schools. So it's a program that was created without providing the proper budgetary funding mechanism, or a program that's basically budgeted. And that's one of the bills that we also put in this year, and that is that there would be a direct budget amount that would be devoted to this program outside the trust fund, because the trust fund is legislatively is for state aid to public schools, not state aid to private schools using taxpayers' money. That program was totally created, and it's the trust fund is devoted to a particular issue without the issue of having these tuition monies coming out of that program.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think.
Go
Yep.
ahead.
No, I was going to say, as a backdrop for all of this, and nobody can really speak to this, I think, better than Mel, is what the state and our taxpayers' constitutional obligations are to public schools and educating our children in New Hampshire.
In Article 6, Wayne, in Article 6 of our Constitution that was passed in 1784, says the following. It says, "No person shall ever be compelled to pay towards the support of schools of any sectarian, sect, or denomination." That's in our Constitution right now. And yet we're paying these millions of dollars of these vouchers to go to these sectarian schools.
And has that been challenged in
It
court
is being
yet?
challenged in court. There is a court case pending before the court right now that challenges that very notion that the money taxpayer money should not be going to private religious schools.
And the New Hampshire Constitution is actually very specific about how taxpayer money gets used to educate New Hampshire's children, and it's through the funding of public schools. That's in our Constitution as well.
Right, right. So, focusing in just for one more moment on those specific guardrails that you've mentioned, how does a citizen uh, reach out to their legislator about this issue, and what are the bills specifically that they need to express their interest in?
So that's the great thing about New Hampshire, right? There's 424 of us, and so everybody knows their legislators because they go grocery shopping with them and find them walking around on the streets and stuff like that. So we're definitely easy to get in touch with, and I don't have the bill numbers right off the top of
Okay.
my head. House Bill 430 does talk about aligning the program with choice for students who are currently in public school and who may be interested in looking at a different an alternative for them, and so that's actually passed the House floor already. But there's a number of other bills as well. One that would limit the school voucher program to budgeted amounts. Another one that, like we said, would require the Department of Education to administer the program, and then another one that would actually help to prevent misuse of public tax dollars. And currently, the law does not place any requirement on the private contractor to refer suspected cases of fraud to the Attorney General. And we know there's been problems with fraud in the handful of other states that have adopted these sorts of programs.
You know, we've also proposed a bill that would demand a recertification of families. Right now, families have to qualify by if they are under 300% of the poverty line, which is about $80,000 a year. That family would have to be recertified every year, because one of the dilemmas you get is that if you have a child, for example, who enters, let's say, the first grade, and the family's making $75,000, in 10 years, that family may be making, $150,000, $175,000.
Right.
And so they would not be within that threshold. The other thing that we propose too is an oversight board that would be able to look at this program throughout the year and have reports on the numbers of kids, how much is there, what is happening with the program. That currently hasn't happened at all. And so those are two additional guide rails, if you will, that we had. The other one that we talked about too is that one of the guide rails is that any provider that receives public monies for kids who are using these vouchers, that they would have to go through a criminal records check, just like any protection of children from going to a provider that may not have the criminal record check. Right now, that's not part of it. It's part of our regular public school system. We feel that same standard should be there with them too. So those are basically the guidelines that David and I have been working on, and the Dems in the House Education Committee on the voucher program.
Now, what about standards for these schools where the state is just is giving them money? Do we require that they live up to some specific educational standards, or do anything to prove that they're doing anything more than childcare?
No,
the response that we get when we raise that question, the response we get is that it's the parent's choice. It's the parent's right to know what those standards are, and they basically would create their own standards in there. So no, it does not have the same kind of academic standards that are in our state laws for other students. Now, you need to realize we currently have about 160,000 kids in public schools. You've got 3,200 in this program, and you've got 4,000 to 5,000 kids who are in charter schools, public charter schools. And they also receive tax money, but the charter schools have more oversight than the education freedom accounts the voucher programs have.
Yeah,
I
and,
see.
and another important point, and it's a really good question, Wayne, is that students with special needs, with individualized education plans, if they when they exit their public school to take a voucher and pay for private school, they're no longer entitled by law to special services. And that's an enormous jeopardy, I think, for this population of students, which statewide is somewhere around 17-18% of the 165,000 students across the state. One of the things that we heard in the governor's proposed school funding budget this morning is that he'd like to lift all income restrictions for families with special education students, so that they can exit their public schools. And I think I'm just not sure that that's the greatest thing for for these children, not to be able to receive the services that they need.
So
Right,
let
so
me
go ahead.
repeat that again, Wayne. So a parent who has a disabled child or a child who has an individual education plan, an IEP, if they choose to take this voucher and go elsewhere, they forfeit their right for any special education services from the public schools. That's a tremendous change for them. And we don't think that they're basically being given that kind of an advice. I'd also say that when we talk about these guardrails that we just reviewed, the governor in his initial budget message to the finance committee did indicate that he thought that guardrails, probably we need some guardrails for this program. So we're just trying to kind of fit in to hopefully what the governor wants on some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully our legislative friends are going to agree with us that there's a lot of money going out there with little oversight and little administration on it.
Yeah, it's almost as though they're handing out bags full of money and saying, you don't have to prove a thing to us. But what really bothers me when you talk about the inability to carry forward an individual education plan is that the only one that's going to suffer from that is the child.
Right.
If the parents have made that decision, they're essentially sloughing off the responsibility for the best interests of that child if the school has already determined that they need an IEP.
Now it's important to note too that if a parent would decide to have their child go to a charter school, a public charter school, there's a direct relationship between the charter school and the resident school district. And there is a memo of understanding, an MOU, that's usually created between the resident school district and the charter school, so that the IEP is ultimately still the responsibility of the public school for working with the charter school and providing the respective services to that child in that setting. So from that parental choice issue, there's a direct link here. But with the Education Freedom Account voucher program, there is none at all.
Okay, so let me make sure that I understand and that the folks who listen to this will understand. You have charter schools that have some guardrails and have some relationship between the public school system and their schools, and so there's some oversight that occurs and some expectation of the quality of education. And then there's this completely separate program that's basically free money for anybody who wants to send their child to a religious school or some other school that doesn't have to qualify in any way for or in any under any set of standards
Well,
to
you have to
educate
remember
our
there,
children.
there is an income standard, Wayne, that you have to meet in order
Mhm.
right now. But there is a move within the legislature. We have the proposal before us, before our committee right now, to take away that, so that would be wide open. So anybody could do this. This program, this voucher program, was originally proposed as a way for those children in poverty can have access to taxpayers' money to have greater choice to move their children there. We knew at the time that that was just the camels under the tent, under the tent. So the real purpose that they're now advocating is anybody can do it. Take away that qualification at 300% poverty level, change the whole nature of what was proposed by the commissioner before the House Finance Committee, so that anybody can get it rather than the original intent, which was to help those who are in an impoverished situation.
Mel and Dave, are we trying to stick fingers in the dike and completely ignoring the need to really take a serious look at where education needs to go in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, I
Yep.
think one of the dilemmas that we're into here is that we have to understand that the frustrating thing for David and I and other public school advocates is that our public school systems here have been always touted as one of the best in the country. We've always been the top 5 in the country when you look at test scores, et cetera. And so then along comes some of the leadership of the Free State Movement and of the conservative movement that say they want to kind of punch an eye into that system and to say, we don't like this system, even though for the majority of the 160,000 kids that the public school service, it's meeting their needs, et cetera. And so that's the frustrating thing for us, that there doesn't seem to be a concern of how do you begin to continue to elevate public schools rather than trying to take and siphon money off into other programs that would undermine the current system that has been working very well.
Dave,
Yeah, I mean, there's I think some other factors at play here too, and that while overall statewide, New Hampshire students perform among the best of the country, the problem is it's just not happening everywhere, and when you take a look at how New Hampshire pays for public schools, it does so almost 90% with state property, to actually more like 80% with
Right.
state property taxes. I'm sorry, with local property taxes, and and the ability to raise revenue through property taxes varies so much from town to town, city to city, and as a result of that, you get some wild swings in property tax rates. I mean, you got property tax rates down near $5 per thousand in places that are lucky enough to have an ocean or lake in their community, and they're closer to $50 per thousand if you don't. And so there's a lot of kids that are doing really well in public schools in towns that can afford reasonable budgets, but you've got other towns where the taxpayers are paying an extraordinary high property tax rate, and they're still not able to put together a reasonable budget to get the job done and meet the needs of their students. And we see it all over the place. And I think it's really I think fueled this debate about whether students should be able to exit their public schools and go somewhere else. and take the state tax money with them, because their local schools aren't getting the job done. But when the state has set up the funding in such a way that's unsustainable and doesn't provide an adequate structure for properly funding schools, what did you expect to have as a result? And so really, what I think Mel and I and you know, a lot of Democrats, but also a handful of elected Republicans would like to do is really turn this debate over towards how do we properly fund our schools and provide every student with an opportunity for a strong outcome.
Yeah, I mean, you may see a wry smile on my face because, as Mel knows, I got my clock cleaned in 1994 when I was the Democratic candidate for governor, talking about this very same thing. And now here we are on the third round of lawsuits.
Right.
But one thing that I would ask is, do we know if it's? I mean, it would seem to me that that if there's an exit of kids that is larger in those very poor towns where the property tax burden is greatest, that we would that would make their problem even larger,
Oh, yeah.
exacerbate their problem.
Right.
Do we know whether the bulk of these kids are coming that are applying for this money are coming from the poorer school districts as opposed to the Waterville Valleys and others?
So, you know, they're coming from all over the state, but they're not coming from public schools. They're already in private schools. So there's students all over the state that, as long as your family is income eligible for just the first year, then you can basically get a check from the state for $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year until you graduate from high school.
So chances are they're not even leaving the public school system.
No.
They're probably
Right.
already in the private
Yeah.
school system.
Again, as I said earlier, 3,200 of the 3,200, only 100 were what we call switchers, which went from the public schools to the private schools. The other 3,100 had already made that choice to go to private schools primarily, and the private schools are primarily religious schools, no question about that. Now, one of the things that we have done, Wayne, is that 2 years ago we had an independent commission that looked at school funding. It was for the first time in 40 years. We had, you remember Augenblick. That was
Yep.
the last time we had somebody from the outside look at our data, the data school districts provide to the Department of Education, a Form 25, which gives them all of the costs, all of the expenses that they've had. Our outside person, our outside group called AIR, which was the American Institute for Research, experts in the field of education funding, they came in and they looked at all of our data. And they basically made some recommendations to this commission. It was a commission of both Democrats and Republicans around the commission, and came out with a report. David was the one who chaired the commission, did a great job in doing that. And we looked at a different way of funding schools. I mean, right now we basically fund schools with what's called an input model. You know, how much is your average principal, teacher, how many chairs, how many books you have. It's all about things. And well, we changed the thing. We said we need to be looking at student outcomes and be funding school district based upon outcome based rather than thing based. And that's what we focused on. David, you might want to comment a bit more about that result.
Yeah. So looking at outcomes is essentially looking at things like district characteristics and student characteristics. Excuse me, and recognizing that it costs more to educate all students in a district if there's a high percentage of students that come from low income households, or a high percentage of students that have special needs or individualized education plans, or a lot of students where English is not their first or primary language, so they're called English language learners, and all of these characteristics increases the cost for a school district to serve all of their students. And so we really looked at it from all right, how are we doing as a state? We're doing really well as a state. So how are school districts appropriating their money? We looked at that, and we came to a conclusion that that really has sort of three different components to it. A base cost component that our current funding formula has in New Hampshire, a student characteristic cost component, like for special education and English language learners. Our current school funding formula in New Hampshire has that. And then really a sort of a household, poverty, a low income component. And yes, our current school funding formula in New Hampshire has that as well too. But it doesn't factor in those characteristics to the degree that they need to be considered, and really need to show the difference between what it cost the Manchester, New Hampshire school district to educate all of its students compared to the Hanover, New Hampshire school district to educate all of its students. And I got to say, I didn't see this coming when we started the commission work back in January of 2020. But probably 4 or 5 months into it, I think a light bulb went off. I think initially with Mel and Senator Khan, and really identified, hey, we've been looking at this the wrong way. We really need to look at it from a student-centered approach, and then really build it from there. So what does it cost for a school district to educate all its kids? What are the resources that a school district has access to pay for that? And then where they come up short, that's where the state comes in, and to make sure that they have access to the resources they need. And then finally, and this is part of the sort of taxpayer fairness component of this, is what type of program do we have in place to make sure that that there's a relief valve for property taxpayers all across the state who might be living on fixed incomes or have other limitations, and what can we be doing to help them out? So all this got put into a final report, which probably, I don't know, what is it, Mel, like 250 pages, but it really documents how we came to these conclusions, and puts these recommendations down so that we as legislators can craft policy around them, and that's what we'll be attempting to do in the upcoming budget discussions. That's
See,
why I'm in the State House today.
unlike when you were in the House and the Senate, we now have data, empirical data on how kids perform on statewide tests, and it's that data that is part of the driver that David's talking about here. And one of the concerns we had in the commission was we need to begin to focus on our kids being our kids throughout the state, not necessarily just my child in my community, because if we're going to develop a workforce for this economy that we have in this state, we need to make sure that it doesn't make any difference whether you're in Claremont or in Rye or in Berlin or in Waterville Valley, that there is an equitable opportunity for kids to have a similar kind of an education so that they can join that workforce and provide part of the vital economy of the state. And so the concept of our kids here was one of the driving factors of the School Funding Commission.
Yeah. Now, some years ago, Mel, and I'm going to get myself into a little bit of hot water over this, I'm sure. um, uh, I think he was Senator Ned Gordon at the time, proposed that that all the teachers in the state become state employees and the responsibility of the state. And I'm sure that the teachers union went crazy about that, but I would just like to ask you to comment on, obviously that still leaves the question of how you pay for that up in the air, but um, what happened when that was discussed before, and is it any different today?
Well, I think one of the things that again, going back to the commission study, one of the things we found is that you could take the current amount of money that is in the budget, not increasing it, but the current amount of money, and have a different allocation, a different distribution of that based upon the formula David was talking about, and move some of that the more money into those school districts that have high turnover of staff and administrators, et cetera. And by doing that, give them the resources, the wherewithal to basically deal with the gaps that they have in their achievement program for their schools. And by doing that, you then would have additional funding so that a teacher in Pittsfield, for example, just outside of Concord, doesn't have to leave Pittsfield to come to Concord and make $10,000 more in their salary because of the differential of the two pay schedules. If Pittsfield had additional resources, financial resources there, they could have greater continuity of their staff, greater continuity of the administrators, rather than having to become just a training ground for the more wealthy school districts. And I think that would address that issue a lot, Wayne.
But when you're talking about the total amount of money, you're talking about state aid plus local property taxes, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Yes.
in order to reallocate that, you're going to have to you're most likely going to have to take some funds away from wealthier towns in order to provide for poorer towns. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm simply saying that from the point of view of equity, it would seem like if all the teachers in the state had the same pay rate, there would be no incentive to go from Colebrook, New Hampshire to Concord, New Hampshire, at least no pay incentive. And you might have better, I don't want to say better teachers, because teachers are certainly not motivated necessarily by money, but it sure helps.
It sure
So,
does.
so I think that's a good point. But if we're not sort of leveling the playing field, or at least providing an equitable, I shouldn't say equal, an equitable playing field for towns like Pittsfield and Allenstown and Chichester and Hopkinton, then if we, right now, all those towns, all those school districts have different teacher salary schedules, right, Mel?
Right.
They're all different. If they're all using same salary schedule, then maybe other aspects of it would be a lot different. Like class sizes would be, 40 in Pittsfield and 20 in Hopkinton. So other characteristics could change. I really think the thing that we need to address in New Hampshire to really provide an equitable education for students and an equitable tax structure for taxpayers is to focus on the funding problem. And I think when you focus on funding, leading with student equity, then the taxpayer equity part actually does follow that. And and we actually saw that, we see that happening where it's done that way, where it's flipped around when we want to do taxpayer equity first. It doesn't necessarily result in good outcomes for students. And so I think, you know, focusing on it this way is going to ultimately get us to you know, get us to a place where your opportunity to succeed as a student isn't dependent on your zip code.
Yeah. Well, okay, so uh, we all know you two because you're in the thick of it, and me because I've had some experience at it. We all know that just a few people in a community can make a huge difference talking to their state rep. I mean, if you see if people saw me getting gas at the gas station and approached me about a bill that was before the legislature, like Ray Burton, I wrote it down. And and I had a little 3x5 card that reminded me every day that I was going to have to keep an eye on that particular bill. So if they don't know the bill numbers, let's say, how can the average citizen uh, make an impact with their state rep and state senator right now over let's just say this year?
Well, you know, I think taxpayers all get voters, um, and voters who are also pay property taxes receive these nice little reminders at least twice a year of what their property taxes are and what their tax rates are.
Right.
And none of the voters, none of the taxpayers around us have held back when saying, "Hey Mel, hey Dave, glad you're running, but what are you doing about my property taxes, and what are you doing about school funding?" They connect those two issues, and I think that's great. You know, next time anybody sees their legislator, any of their legislators at Market Basket or at Hannaford or at Shaw's or at the local you know, Colonial Village Market, ask them that question. You know, what are you doing about my property taxes? What are you doing about school funding? And if enough legislators hear that, then I think they'll take seriously, you know, these spreadsheets like what we got from the governor today on you know, changes to the school funding formula that make a real difference for students and taxpayers. So you know, I think it's you know, we're Mel and I think are really fortunate to be in the Hopkinton Concord Bow area because nobody's shy and they reach out to us and they connect these issues. But that needs to be happening in all parts of the state, and you don't have to go very far. I mean, you know, we're fortunate. Hopkins, Concord, and Bow also have very strong school districts and strong student outcomes. But you go 20 minutes up the road to Newport, they got the highest property tax rate in the state and some of the poorest student outcomes in the state. So you know, if the voters up there aren't reaching out to their legislators, reach out to us, and we'll help them you know, get in touch with them.
The commission has laid a foundation for reform of the current system, and there is currently and it meets all the requirements of the various court suits that the legislature has refused to basically deal with. Right now, it's a one size fits all. Every child gets $4,700, right? And what we're saying is that's what the courts have said is wrong. There's currently a court suit pending before the judge, and we hope that based upon the work that the commission did, that the judge will begin to look that there is another way to do this thing that's a fairer way that basically provides an equity factor there that hasn't been there in the past and that the legislature has refused to deal with.
And Wayne, important to add on to this, it does that using the same state dollars that are being used right now. doesn't require any new revenue sources, doesn't require any major changes to existing revenue sources, just requires us to change the formula and how we go about getting it done. And and that will make all the difference.
Well, we are very lucky to have you, Mel Myler and Dave Luneau, there, because clearly we need people who of conscience who are there and keeping an eye on the kind of education that our kids are getting. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. And I hope I haven't seemed too naive or ignorant in my questioning.
Never, Wayne.
Well,
Thank you very much for the
Thank
opportunity.
you. And you know, you were one of the leaders in there way long ago, and we're just trying to pick up that mantle that you laid for us.
Right.
We just hope that others will begin to say, "Hey, it's about time to do something here because there is an alternative here."
Yep.
Thank you for everything you do. Take care.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Wayne.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.